Hello there, welcome back to Better Ballistics. Today I'm working on a Webley Mark VI revolver, a British model made between 1915 and 1923 and by far the most common of the 455 Webley series. It was the main sidearm of the British military in World War I, more on that later. Now, the reason it looks bone dry is because I've already degreased it. We store these guns into sealed bags after covering them in oil, but since oil hides the extent of rusting, I always degrease them in acetone before starting to film, of course without grips. This way we can appreciate the actual conditions better. Now, this gun has a plethora of issues, like many revolvers of the same make, and the ruined finish is just one of them. The grips are discolored, the cylinder revolves freely, and there's something wrong with the ejector, so let's get to work. Since I've always started with metal work, this time I'm instead going to begin from the grips, because these are somewhat special. They were made out of so-called vulcanite. It's a highly vulcanized, hence the name, form of natural latex to the point that it becomes a rigid plastic instead of rubber. The problem, however, is that it's supposed to be black. I tried searching through gun-related literature, but couldn't find anything regarding the restoration of such a material, since it's not at all common. However, I did find something on pipe stems and sax mouthpieces that were made out of the same material before the introduction of modern plastics. Apparently, the yellowing is due to the surfacing of sulfur contained in the material, the core ingredient of the vulcanization process, and polishing the material is supposed to eliminate it. I tried rubbing with a scouring sponge and the surface did indeed start to improve. That, however, wouldn't have worked for the checkering, so I instead used polishing compound, a nylon brush and the same reciprocating power of a 13-year-old boy. In the end, I almost got them back to their original color, and I'm quite satisfied with that. Let's get back to the metal. It should be smooth sailing from now on. Turns out the extractor spring is broken into two pieces, which is a bit annoying, but I'll take the occasion to show you how I'm going to rebuild it. Looking at the main parts, I can already see some rather large pits witnessing an ancient, rather important corrosion. But the rust produced then must have been scrubbed off over the years, and what we're left with is just a thin coat that must have happened in storage more recently before we got it. I could have covered this gun in a fake build-up of corrosion products, compensating for the missing ones, getting a better thumbnail and 10 times more views, but I didn't. It's like somebody shows up to your door and offers you $10,000 just to film a fake or misleading video. When I decided to film these without fakery, I kindly refused that exact offer. Turns out in the media world, partisan talking points and sensational reporting are more profitable than telling the truth, and as part of my ongoing effort to find reliable information, I've partnered with Ground News, who kindly sponsored this video. It's a website and app that aggregates tens of thousands of news sources around the globe so that you can compare how the same story is covered by each of them, making it easier to spot fake news and tell which news outlets favor profit over integrity. Each source is given an independent factuality rating. If political or national biases are present, they are highlighted. For example, during these sad times, Russian-owned news outlets always depict a different picture than most of the others. Ground News warns you when such a situation happens, but doesn't censor any source, allowing the reader to see the whole picture. For example, just a few days ago, two people opened fire against Russian recruits training in a shooting range in Belgorod. Russian outlets depicted them as non-specified Western-backed terrorists, while many others suggest the shooters were recruits themselves, shooting other comrades over religious arguments. And you know, for the reputation of an army, one thing is getting shot by the enemy, another is getting shot by your own recruits. Ground News is one of the sponsors that I'm most proud of, and I suggest you try it out for free at ground.news/backyard or subscribe to get unlimited access for a much more transparent news experience and support my channel in the process. Link in description below. Back to the gun. It's clear that the bluing suffered a lot and I'll have to go for a full refinish. I'll start dissolving rust and what is left of the bluing with a citric acid solution. Scrubbing with a wire brush from time to time greatly speeds up the process. Once the parts are taken out, rinsed and dried, I have to decide what to do. This design has a lot of flat surfaces, so I'm going to use a file on them instead of sanding. The technique is called draw filing and involves the use of a single cut file, that is one that has teeth going only in one direction rather than the much more common double cut ones. Also, the file is held perpendicular to the working movement, and this allows accurate filing of large flat surfaces. I would never be able to get rid of the larger pits, but I can try to hide them with filing marks. There's no point in getting a highly polished surface that is full of pits. Also, all these guns had pretty heavy tool marks on them to begin with, and I like to get them back to their original look as best as I can. Unfortunately, I can't do anything to the cylinder, since the outer surface of it contains the reference notches for its alignment to the barrel. This gun was already showing cylinder issues, and I don't want to make it any worse. So at this point, I'm going to do the bluing, and then we'll take care of the mechanical issues. I take the occasion to share with you another very simple, one-ingredient rust bluing recipe that you can easily make yourself. It's based on ferric chloride, a salt easily available for the purpose of etching printed circuit boards. It's usually supplied as a water solution, minus 38%, and we'll have to dilute it to just 1.5%. In my case, that means adding 4 milliliters of the solution and then adding distilled water on top of that to reach 100 milliliters. And that's it, the rust solution is ready. No chemical reactions, no acid vapors, no toxic chemicals. I'm sparely applying it to the surfaces I want to blue and then swabbing them over with some 6% hydrogen peroxide. This allows the rusting to happen much quicker than naturally and will allow me to get a bluing done in a day instead of a week. At this point I got a very fine-grained rust coat and I'm dunking the parts into some clean boiling water. On the gun frame you can see the surface turn black before your eyes. After 10 minutes or so they can be taken out, scrubbed with steel wool and the process repeated until the color stops getting darker. As far as results go, I can't see any difference from those obtained with the more complex solution I normally use, so I'm quite happy I tried this one out and I'm sure some of you will put it to good use. Now on this gun I don't want to add any blue reflections, so I'm going straight to oiling. I could simply oil it, but you get a nicer effect by rubbing boiled linseed oil while keeping the part warm. Alright, for all these bits I'm instead using a hot bluing bath since that's much more practical on parts of this size. This is my favorite hot bluing mix. It's advisable to first do a slight pickling in dilute muriatic acid, then a rinse in distilled water and then dunk in the boiling mix, which should be kept to a rolling boil for the whole duration, which is about 30 minutes. A good rinse in water is important, otherwise leftover salts will bloom out of holes and crevices over time. Okay, now that our parts are all clean, blued and lubricated, let's check the functioning. Which leaves a lot to be desired. This design uses these notches on the cylinder to hold it in position until the trigger is pulled, but the trigger stop doesn't reach far enough to properly engage some of them. I definitely have to sort that out. The next thing I'm checking is chamber alignment, that is if the 6 chambers of the cylinder get properly aligned with the barrel when the trigger is pulled, keeping the cylinder under tension by hand. And it actually wasn't too bad. I could see a tiny bit of over travel, but nothing to be worried about, especially considering the age of this thing. However, there are some timing issues. This means that by the time the trigger is pulled and the hammer starts dropping, the cylinder has not reached its final position. We can check that by trying to wiggle the cylinder while keeping the trigger pulled. If the cylinder is able to rock back and forth, it means that the action has not rotated it far enough. On our revolver, there is a slight wobble on 3 consecutive chambers. It means that this bit, called the hand, responsible for rotating the cylinder by acting on the ratchet, is not making it rotate far enough to hit the end stop. The cylinder is slightly out of time. Now, you don't really need to have the cylinder completely stuck. Most new revolvers will have a small plate deliberately built into them for various reasons, and doing a proper retiming requires having or making oversized spares, and that's a lot of work. Also, in our case, the timing error and the misalignment one happen in opposite directions, so they'll tend to partially cancel each other out. One can try to mitigate the issue a bit by pinning the ratchet tips corresponding to the out-of-time chambers, trying to move some material backwards, but that's quite a desperate attempt. For the trigger stop, which only has the function of keeping the cylinder still when not in use, I did something similar, hammering it on all sides to slightly increase its length. This time you can definitely hear the trigger stop engaging its notches in the cylinder, and that's another issue taken care of. The last thing I need to look after is the extractor spring. The closest off-the-shelf spring that I have is this one, but it won't fit inside the axle, and the thicker wire would also make it too stiff. Remember that spring stiffness is proportional to the fourth power of the wire diameter, which means that just a 20% increase in wire size doubles the stiffness, so I'll have to wind my own. I'm using music wire, which is spring steel treated so that its elastic limit is high enough to behave as a spring, but still ductile enough for it to take a bend without breaking. It's harder to bend and springs back much more than a annealed spring wire, which is a bit annoying, but has the advantage of not requiring heat treatment after winding. There we go, now the gun is ready to fire. The barrel is not in the prettiest of conditions, it does have some rough spots here and there, but it's definitely good enough to fire, and so are the chambers of the cylinder. As for the ammunition, this gun is chambered for the 4.55 Webley round, the main Commonwealth handgun cartridge from 1891 to 1931, when the 38-200 cartridge was issued. Both these cartridges share a very heavy, slow bullet and a lower than average pressure limit. The pressure limit was probably dictated by the top break design of the weapon, which is not particularly strong, but the heavy and slow bullet was the Army's preference. For the 4.55, the standard military load was a 265 grains, hollow-based lead round-nose bullet of about the same diameter as 45 ACP, but heavier and slower, with a muzzle velocity of only 190 meters per second, which makes this one of the slowest small arms round ever adopted. At around 310 joules, the muzzle energy produced is about the same as the much smaller 380 Auto. For comparison, the similarly sized 45 ACP typically develops muzzle energies in excess of 500 joules. The 4.55 Webley actually went through a series of changes over the years, and what I described is the Mark II version, which was the mostly used one and the one our gun would have most likely been used with. Bottom line is, I need some 4.55 Mark II ammo. Factory loads are rarely available, so I thought of reloading, but while going through brass and bullets, I found a box of ammo loaded by my friend Guy, replicating a Mark II loading, which at the time seemed like a lucky find. First few rounds felt underpowered, otherwise working fine, but then the little noise and absence of recoil indicate that even though the primer fired, the bullet didn't leave the barrel. And in fact, there it is. This is a potentially dangerous situation. If I had simply pulled the trigger again, I would have fired another normal power round on an obstructed barrel, causing it to bulge. This usually happens because whoever made the ammo, in this case Guy, forgot to put powder in the cartridge, but that was not the case. Upon unloading the gun, a lot of unburned powder came out, which indicates that powder was indeed present, but a combustion instability happened. That means that the powder gets ignited by the primer, but then quickly reduces its burning rate to the point of self-extinguishing. This can be for two reasons, either a weak primer or an insufficient amount of powder, but I think in this case the latter happened. In any case, this is not really dangerous as long as you make sure the bullet has left the barrel, and I kept shooting. We had another few dead rounds, with one shooting the bullet so slow that you can see it. The shots that did fire properly made this grouping at 10 meters of distance, but I'm sure better ammo would have performed better, so I'll reload some properly and film a short video to put either here or on my second channel. Once again, a huge thanks goes to my patrons, which as usual are all listed here. Thank you all for watching, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you next time. Bye.